when we set out to build on Bittensor, we always wanted to build something that was more than one product, one subnet. You need more than just tokens or just predictions or just this. A lot of Constellation has been about building up an infrastructure to combine things. We gave you a very small demo of like a Constellation-like feature where we're using Subnet One to do stuff on Subnet 13. A lot of the architectural work on the back end that we've been doing has been to make those things really easy to do repeatedly. So as we bring up our training subnets, our research subnet, Mainframe, but also more broadly, there's a load of great subnets in Bittensor that we kind of want to use in a consumer product.
R1 was a real watershed moment for open source AI because they came up with this really clever formula where they don't tell it how to think step by step. That was a paradigm that the whole of the sort of deep learn, well, certainly the sort of LLM inference sphere was very focused on chain of thought, which was like, go step by step and tell me how you think you're going to get to your goal. And then there was also a season in the research space where people were like, okay, now I'm going to grade each intermediate step and make sure it adheres to the accepted intermediate result that I get using my approach. Now, what R1 did that was really interesting is they just stripped out all that intermediate stuff and they just said it's right or wrong. Now, this is very similar to what AlphaZero did. So this is pure reinforcement learning where you just get a signal at the end of the day, at the end of the game of chess, at the end of the game of Go, whatever it might be. And the nice thing there is the model has way more freedom to decide what the best strategy is to get to the right answer. Molecular dynamic simulations are very informative. You insert an initial protein shape or configuration. It could just be a linear chain of all of the amino acids. And then what comes out of it in the end is the shape that complicated mixture of atoms will eventually reach in organic matter. And there's a saying in computational biology, which is form defines function. This means the shape that the protein eventually reaches and stabilizes towards will define how it interacts with your body, whether it's a medicine, whether it's toxic. The shape of it is kind of everything you want to know about it in some respects. However, there remains one more step, which is now that it has taken the shape, we've run our molecular dynamics simulation, we've learned something about it, we now need to examine how does it interact with other stuff? How does it interact with drugs? If you take an aspirin that decomposes in your stomach acid, it travels through your bloodstream and it attaches to proteins in your body. That's what gives it its effect. It's sort of a new game that we've created, inspired by something called a general adversarial network, which were very popular in like 2016 to 2018.
I built one in a previous life.
Did you?
Yeah,
I didn't know that about you. Yeah, it was basically created by an Apple researcher, a guy called Ian Goodfellow. And the idea is you've got two networks that are training in tandem. One of them, let's say the task is to produce high quality images of people, portraits, for argument's sake. So one network is going to generate images. It's just going to churn them out and churn them out and churn them out. How do you score whether they're good or not? Well, you could just have a fixed label or an annotation from a human saying this is correct, this is not. But it turns out you can blast through the roof and keep improving if you have a second network that's learning to discriminate between real images and the ones that network just created. So now you've got this coupled system where one is getting better at producing realistic synthetic data, and another one is getting better at discriminating between real and synthetic data. And the two are in a battle.
Your miners are your community. Don't stiff them on weird emission cutbacks, stuff like this. Like, I'm in DMs with so many of our big miners about what we're doing. They're our holders now. Like, your miners are your holders. If your miners don't have conviction in what you're doing, you're screwed. So that's really important. The second element, it's a piece of advice given by me very early in our thing, is DCA every day. If you're trying to build funds, pay salaries, the compute costs, don't try game the market, understand subnet sentiment, understand crypto pricing, find ways to let you focus on building and not get too caught up in staring at the price and worrying about that. It means that, when times are good, you don't get too excited, and when times are bad, you don't get too upset. And it means you'll be here for the long haul. So, for me, I just hope as many teams are here for the long haul on Bittensor as possible.
Welcome to the Ventura Labs podcast. Today, we're joined by Steffen Cruz and Will Squires, pioneers in shaping the decentralized AI frontier. As Macrocosmos nears its first anniversary, they reflect on their journey within the evolving ecosystem, dissecting advancements in open source AI, subnet adaptations, and time-sensitive agentic systems. They unpack breakthroughs with tool calling frameworks, adversarial networks, and self-improvement architectures, while spotlighting collaborations that expand decentralized data ecosystems, and looking ahead for the future of decentralized intelligence, balancing technical ambition with collective empowerment. Now, back to Steffen and Will with the 32nd Ventura Labs podcast. All right. Will, Steffen, good to have you guys back on the podcast. Last time we spoke was September 16th, 2024. It is now, was this March 20th, 2025? Lots changed. How have you guys been?
Doing great. Navigating the strange new world that we live in that is detail, but doing great, thank you.
Yeah, there's like a strange serendipity to these podcasts, Grant, in that I think when we did our first call in September, you were almost bang on the 6-month anniversary of Macrocosmos. And here we are 6 months later, and today is actually our first birthday party. It's on Saturday, but we're not making people work the weekend, but we are 1 year old on the 22nd of March. So
We have Macrocosmos cake in the office today.
Yeah, and you guys now have a team of 32, I believe?
something like that, 32, 33. It's a bit of like a temporal function. If you include the miners, like 600, but...
That is a good point. If you include the miners as... Wait,
I do
have a question. How does Subnet One have so many UID slots?
It's a legacy feature. It's not something that we chose. It's because it was transferred from pre-revolution. Before revolution, Subnet 1 had 1024. Subnet 11, it had 4096. So I think it had 4 times more. It was just running the same incentive mechanism as Subnet 1, but with sort of less incentive, kind of like as an on-ramp to the community to mine on Subnet 1. It was like the middle league and the Premier League. And I believe there was one other subnet as well, Subnet 3, but I don't remember how many that had. But yeah, we just kind of, we sort of picked up a legacy artifact of life before revolution.
Do you think that's going to come back? UIDs are going to be customizable like that?
Yeah, I think we were actually talking in the office today about something we're looking at doing on training, and one of the questions the engineers was having was actually, are we fixed at 256? Can we go to 1,024, 4,096, 10,000? And I think there's been a lot of focus in the most recent era of Bittensor on like making incentives isometric and otherwise, but as the network gets bigger and as like each of these subnets becomes in many ways their own protocol in and of themselves, more customization for subnet owners I think is going to be more important. I mean, we saw Hippias, the storage subnet, launch this week that has its own blockchain that sits alongside it. So you can see that other teams are already looking at how you plug these pieces together. Like as you want to do bolder, more ambitious things, what do you need to change and add? And I think, yeah, like the sanctity of the 256 for most subnets, I think is something that I'd imagine teams are going to ask to change as they want to do different or more interesting or less interesting things.
I think there's something that already exists in Bitcoin where you've got these sort of proxy miner pools where under one UID or slot on the network, you've actually got an entire pool of sort of secondary level miners. The inconvenience comes in when, because it's not tracked on chain, you don't have this sort of trustless distribution of incentive to the people that participate under keys. But I'm sure the foundation's cooking up something there to make sure that these things can scale as they need to.
Yeah, they always have something up their sleeve. Also, in AI, I guess in general, a lot has, I wouldn't say changed, but a lot has happened since we last spoke. Probably the biggest point has been DeepSeek coming out. How have you guys seen the world of AI evolve over these past 6 months?
I would say, if I can take that, when we were at the foundation, the models that we were using were frontier open source models at that time. We used Pythia, we used Vicuña. These were all Llama 2 level sort of models, and to be honest, it was quite hard to do what we wanted to do with them because they just didn't really follow instructions and could barely string together a coherent sentence. Also, I guess the backdrop there was GPT 3.5 was transformed into GPT 4. The gap between sort of frontier open source models and proprietary models felt like it was widening, which was certainly something that we watched very carefully. Of course, for us, the more capable the open source models are that we can integrate into Bittensor, the more we can just level up Bittensor with that intelligence. And in fact, I think it's been a really, really good news story the last 6 months. I could not have even expected it to be so positive, to be honest, Grant. I mean, what we got was something that not only is not 6 or 12 months behind Frontier, but we got something that beat it, or at least is on par with it. So this is wonderful news for the whole open source AI initiative in general, and for Bittensor, I think we have done great things with that, and we will continue to integrate those advances and build on top of them.
I think another thing that's quite relevant is the growth in interest in decentralized training. So I think when we spoke to you back in September, we were talking about some of the work we were doing on 9 and distro and some of the other stuff. If we look at the world we're in today, there's Prime Intellect, there's Pluralis, there's News Research, there's Templar, all doing great forms of incentivized training. And I think there's been a lot more interest and validation that this space can compete, not just on serving tokens, deploying inference, doing clever things, but also on the actual sort of core work of training models and building models for the ecosystem. And I think in general that the open source AI hype has been great. DeepSeek's a really good example of that. But I also think a lot of the decentralized AI, distributed AI, technology has really taken a step forward as well in terms of, we're now arguing about which methods and behaviors are best, not is this possible, which is really exciting.
That is a good evolution. And also, your subnets benefit from any AI developments because if they're open source. So what have you guys been doing on Subnet One specifically? I know you guys have 5 subnets. We'll start with 1 because you did just release a product that people can play with a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, sure. I can answer that. So I guess one thing to frame this is while we are the grateful beneficiaries of external innovations in open source AI, and we use them to power some of our products, part of our mandate here at Macrocosmos is to try and create a margin of improvement on top of them. And by that, what I mean is we don't just download things from Hugging Face or from whoever else has released a great model and then just consume it. Macrocosmos is very much about not being just consumers, but creators. And so in Subnet One, it's been a really interesting 6 months. I think there's been a couple of paradigm shifts in the way that we've been thinking about building our product and sort of powering it with the subnet. One of them is we've now fully divorced ourselves from just purely being in sort of the realm of synthetic data. And for the benefit of the listener, I guess synthetic data is like a game that is played between validators and miners. And you can think of it as the validator has a textbook in their hand and they just open it to a random page and they find some, esoteric, complex knowledge on that page. And then they ask a series of very hard exam questions about what they have on the page. The difficulty of the game for the miners is they don't have the textbook. They don't know what the textbook is. So you've got this beautiful asymmetry of information. So the validator can ask really, really hard questions that's not just based on one paragraph, but maybe, threads the needle through the entire book and asks some really intricate, complex conversation that you kind of need to know the entire book to answer. Whereas for the miners, again, they have to search the internet, try and find similar sources and produce high quality responses. So this is what is powerful about synthetics. However, the other side of the coin is organics. Organics are real user queries. So now we've launched our product. We don't know what the textbook is either, right? As the subnet developers, as the validators. And so as a result, if someone comes to our platform and asks a really involved, challenging question, whether it's about math or programming or something else, the difference is this textbook privileged information design doesn't translate very gracefully into that scenario. So what we've been working on a lot in Subnet One since we last saw you is what are the building blocks that will enable us to ensure that we can perform much better than just taking a leading open source model off the shelf and giving you that as a reply. So that would be like deterministic inference. We take R1 off the shelf, you ask us a question, and then what we say is whatever R1 says, to be honest, and the miners just have to mimic that. What we've been doing instead is using what's known as test time compute. So basically lots more tokens, much more structured thinking patterns so that the validators can calibrate this sort of measurement stick as to how good the miner responses are based on some much more complex and, again, more complete understanding of what the user request is. And one way that we gamify that right now is using what we call time dilation, which is basically the validator may have 1 hour to produce this phenomenal polished response. It searches the web, it writes some code, it uses some tools, all of the modern parts of an AI system that people are getting used to, whereas the miners have to match that quality in 5 seconds. And that asymmetry in time translates into a really interesting game as well, which we're now, we're all in on that. That's really what we're thinking about right now. How can we make that as challenging as possible for miners and improve the quality of responses? But did you want to jump on that?
I think for the listener, an example of this is on Subnet One, we've chosen to, for a period of time, keep using Llama 3 as the validator model. And Llama 3 is like a good model. It's sort of 4, 5, 6 months out of date now. But what we've been able to do is force miners to respond with much more powerful models for a cheaper compute cost on our side. So, we've done some analysis where we check the models that we think miners use. And we know miners have responded with R1 against Llama 70B, which previously in Bittensor you hadn't seen. It's just bastardizations of Llama with a few bells and whistles. We've seen miners have used O1, deep research, combinations of the two. And this is really promising for us because what it says is previously, and with a lot of the deterministic subnets, the validator is the arbiter of intelligence. It becomes like a block. You cannot become more clever than this. And what we've proven with the SM1 validation is the miners can be as clever as they want. And the more clever they are, the more reward they'll receive, which is really exciting for us as it means you can start to get into this uncapped space where some OpenAI assistant might be running a secret version of their model off because it gets more reward. Or, we think at one point we actually saw some responses from like the Grok 3 release early, but we're not sure about that.
It's also it's very reminiscent of Subnet One's original design, which was a mixture of experts model. So like the subnet topology was almost designed to sort of mimic a certain type of machine learning model, where you've basically got queries can go into the network, and then each miner is a specialist, and they can pick and choose the models that they use. They might use multiple models, they might synthesize those answers, and the net result is you can sort of, at any given moment, you can ask a domain expert in the network the answer to the question. And we tried that for a while at the foundation, and things in a way have kind of come full circle, because now what we've got is this sort of more efficient marketplace for miners that are very qualified to answer certain types of question. They're now free to do it again without being, as Will mentioned, confined to just running a specific model under specific settings without any without any space for innovation.
There's also been a lot of innovation in like the tool calling abilities of language models recently. Have you seen like an uptick in the performance of your miners with the innovation in tool calling?
I think, yeah, more broadly. And also SN1 is a task-oriented agentic system. So we have discrete tools that miners can call and use. I suppose, I'm not sure when this is airing, but the Squad platform that Rayon are launching this week, their agentic system is going to use a couple tools from Subnet One and a couple 13 as things their agents can call. So the web search capabilities, I think some of the reasoning endpoints, and some of the data scraping from 13. So we've always been designing with this agentic push, this much more tool-enabled LLM model in mind. And it's exciting to see it start to come to fruition within Bittensor, not just outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing with these language models is when you give them more time to like think about a question, they tend to answer better. Why is that?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing that I would say is it depends on the model. Some models will just waste your time. It really depends on some of the minutiae of the way that they're trained. So R1 was a real watershed moment for open source AI because they came up with this really clever formula where they don't tell it how to think step by step. That was a paradigm that the whole of the sort of deep learn, well, certainly the sort of LLM inference sphere was very focused on chain of thought, which was like, go step by step and tell me how you think you're going to get to your goal. And then there was also a season in the research space where people were like, okay, now I'm going to grade each intermediate step and make sure it adheres to the accepted, intermediate result that I get using my approach. Now, what R1 did that was really interesting is they just stripped out all that intermediate stuff and they just said it's right or wrong. Now, this is very similar to what Alpha 0 did. So this is pure reinforcement learning where you just get a signal at the end of the day, at the end of the game of chess, at the end of the game of Go, whatever it might be. And the nice thing there is the model has way more freedom to decide what the best strategy is to get to the right answer. You don't tell it you have to hit these intermediate checkpoints. You just say, go forth, use these resources. In this case, use as many tokens as you need to, just get the damn answer right. And that's how they found that there's this sort of emergent phenomenon, which they call the aha moment, which is when the model actually learned that instead of just digging itself into a hole when it made a mistake, which is very much what they do, right? They see that they've already output something with a specific point in mind, and then it's not in their training data to actually backpedal and change their mind and pivot. There's no examples of that, so they're never trained to do that. So what they do is they just burn themselves famously, right? Now, with R1, what it learned is it was like, oh, there's actually no problem if I just pivot mid-answer. I'm just going to actually read what I just said, realize that it's garbage, and I'm just going to start a new train of thought. That was massive. That means this thing can completely recalibrate itself in flight because the only thing that it cares about is the end result instead of being consistent with what it said so far. So really, I think that's been a really interesting development in the open source space. And again, I think that this sort of longer thinking process is really most effective when you've got this kind of very strict rewarding system. And this is actually something that we're starting to bring into Subnet One as well. It's sort of a new game that we've created, inspired by something called a general adversarial network, which were very popular in 2016 to 2018.
I built one in a previous life.
Did you?
Yeah,
I didn't know that about you. Yeah, it was basically created by an Apple researcher, a guy called Ian Goodfellow. And the idea is you've got two networks that are training in tandem. One of them, let's say the task is to produce high quality images of people, portraits, let's say, for argument's sake. So one network is going to generate images. It's just going to churn them out and churn them out and churn them out. How do you score whether they're good or not? Well, you could just have a fixed, a label or an annotation from a human saying this is correct, this is not. But it turns out you can blast through the roof and keep improving if you have a second network that's learning to discriminate between real images and the ones that network just created. Okay? So now you've got this coupled system where one is getting better at producing realistic synthetic data, and another one is getting better at discriminating between real and synthetic data, and the two are in a battle. And because of that mechanism, what happens is they both get really, really, really good at it, and the net result is it's something that basically this model can outperform sort of a baseline equivalent, which is just trained on a static data set with fixed labels. And in Subnet One, we're doing that right now to solve the problem of measuring intelligence, where, as I mentioned before, the miners produce these responses in a limited amount of time. The validators produce them, not every time, they produce them, say, 1 in every 10 requests. The validator will also produce a very high quality, very time-consuming response. Now the rest of the network are given this task as to whether they can distinguish between the answer that the miner gave in 5 seconds versus the answer that the validator gave after 5 minutes. Now the nice thing about this game is the miner has to become indistinguishable from the validator to get a predictable reward. Because if there's any giveaway, if there's any takes, if there's anything that's salient and different between these two, this miner just will not get paid. So the nice result of this is it's very much like the general adversarial networks where they're going to start generating better and better responses. And as they get better and better and they get closer and closer to the perfect score, well, the branch of the network which is tasked with discriminating between the two of them also has to get better and better. So it's a constantly sort of self-improving system that we're going to be launching in the next couple of weeks. It was a real superstar moment for one of our engineers that finally cracked this. He's been working on it for quite a while, and it looks very promising.
Do you think that translates to more narrowly focused, expert type models, and you kind of just orchestrate them all to work together? Or do you think we'll still see these giant, massive models like R1?
It's a really good question. What I can tell you right now is I think that the evolutionary pressure on the network is one that many miners are trying to do well across the board. There's some degree of specialization. For example, Subnet One has multiple tasks. Each task has its own funding pool, its own incentive pool. Some miners come in really strong in certain tasks and they struggle to keep up with others because there's innovation happening across all of those verticals. Right now, I would say it's kind of a hybrid where miners know that they need to be top 50 percentile in all of them, but if they're going to crush, they can like really target one or two domains. But again, there's an evolutionary pressure where we have a single hyperparameter that we tune that basically says, how high in the top percentile do you have to be in a certain task before you just don't receive any incentive? And the higher we lift that water level, the more we force everyone to either go between being specialists, where it's safe to be the best in one class, versus generalists, where you have to be in the top few in all classes to get anything. So that's actually something that we can kind of modulate right now at the level of the code base.
And you guys segment that based off like web search, reasoning, chain of thought?
They are three of them, exactly.
And programming and a few others.
Exactly.
And we have a few more cooking. But
Yeah.
I think this also links to like Subnet One, for its sins, has always been quite a complex network. We've always been trying to do quite a lot with it. And for us, we want to keep being able to create broader incentive pools and more complex environment spaces where we can do a multitude of different tasks. And we've looked at even embedding some of the, I guess, other sort of tasks and mechanisms you see within Bittensor that are their own whole subnet into a part of one, because the architecture is built in a way that we can do that. And as we sort of find product market fit with this sort of tool calling, agentic, accelerated use case, what we're likely to do is keep bringing on more pools of tasks that correspond to more pools of miners, that correspond to more pools of work, that corresponds to more intelligence. And, we're working internally on a system we call Mission Commander, which is basically an agentic layer that sits across the top of our platform that can call tools, interact with other subnets, use the best component of Subnet One as is necessary to complete a task, and ultimately sort of be a bit of a sort of operating system for our tools and products, but also the broader Bittensor ecosystem.
How do you see Subnet One working with one of your, I guess, Subnet 13, the data subnet, that also has a product now on top of it, and you got some more things you want to talk about coming with that today too?
Do you want a live demo?
I think Will wants to give you a live demo. This is not released yet.
This is on test, and there's already a couple errors in this iteration. But let me share my screen on. Oh, I can't share my screen, or maybe I can share this. It's just letting me do it within Chrome. You see the screen, Grant?
Yes, I see the screen.
So the right-hand side's the task scraping interface we've been running with Gravity. And the left-hand side is an agentic system operating off Subnet One that's meant to automate a lot of the tasks. So I want to learn all about Ventura Labs, a podcast researching Bittensor subnets and specializing in decentralized AI, machine learning, and Austin barbecue.
We'll see how good the SEO is for
Let's see if
Ventura
it
Labs
works.
right
Let's
now.
see if it works. It's not going to work on me now. There you go. So we can't actually see it, it's behind the window, but this completely pre-populates all the search tasks, all the things you might be interested in. It's now asking you to go through the flow and specify subreddits you want or other things. But one of the things we had as feedback from users when they were like, we're trying to scrape all this data was, well, I don't know what subnets exist. I don't know what hashtags I care about. I don't know what to look for. So this is just a small example of something that, we sort of realized was a good example to combine subnets together, and it makes the whole system easier to use. So that's coming out, I think, next week or beyond.
Yeah.
But this is the sort of way we expect to use the intelligence on Subnet One across all of our subnets, all of our products, and everything we combine into Constellation.
I think another use case that I'm a data scientist at heart, so I'm a real data nerd. Something that I'm really excited about that we've been building as well is, so we have Nebula, which is a data visualizer. What it effectively does is it can take a large data set of posts from a social media platform, then it vectorizes them, and then it embeds them into a three-dimensional cloud. And you can basically see the structure of topics emerge from the data itself. So things just leap out of the page at you. It helps you introspect and understand what's in your data. And that's really cool, but we think that what's even cooler than that is then being able to talk to this point cloud. So now that you've basically got all of these posts in there, we already have a basic keyword matching filter, so you can basically type into the search bar any term you want, and it will highlight the areas that coincide with that term. But what's much more powerful is a nuanced search engine where you actually search for the semantics of something that you care about. So you can just ask it a natural language question like, what do people think about, ABC? I don't have a good example right now. And it actually is much better at getting sort of to the crux of the question that you have and engaging with you in a conversation about what the data is telling it. The way this works is Subnet One is the inference engine on top. Subnet 13's Nebula is sort of a vector database, for lack of a better term, and you can basically converse with the system. So you can basically talk to a data set and have a conversation, and it will tell you then the model will tell you what it's learned about the structure of the data, help you draw conclusions, help you extract actionable insights from the data. So these are two pretty nascent features that we've been working on. They should go live in the next week or two. We're really excited about those, but we think that there's a lot of even broader collaboration as well that's on our roadmap now. As Will mentioned, we are working with the great guys at Rayon Labs. They're going to be announcing some big stuff tomorrow on novelty search. I don't want to give too much away, but it's always been important for us that Bittensor is more than the sum of its parts. Subnet teams work together. We all have these very powerful systems that we're developing, but I don't want them to stay in isolation. I think Bittensor's superpower is when all of these components can be aggregated and orchestrated so that we have I use this term too much, but multimodal AI supercomputer, which is effectively what Bittensor is building organically.
Well, at the heart of all AI models essentially is data. Without data, there is no model. So you mentioned Rayon Labs. I've also seen some stuff of you with Score, Subnet 44. Do you have
Go ahead.
more collabs coming soon? And what do these collaborations generally look like?
I think we should talk about 44 for a minute.
Yeah, so look, I met the guys. I met Max at 44 and Nigel at a dinner in London that the guys at Tensora organized, and I love what they're doing. They're doing a lot originally they were looking at predicting football games, but they're now looking at basically sort of building like a decentralized opta, like where they're tracking player actions and other pieces. And we've gone through a lot of eras in Bittensor looking at prediction. So people have gone through the prediction subnet era has been really big, but the reality is when we spoke to those guys, they were like, we would love all this data on public perception of players, data on what does somebody on Reddit say someone's limping and is that useful for their data? Do people have value in the long trend opinions on the performance of a club and otherwise, and can that feed into algorithms? And for them, they were like, loads of data from Bittensor free, really, really good. We sort of have been scheming with them about the best way to work on that. And we hopefully have some more news on that in the next few weeks. But the original piece with this was just to start people using the data from Gravity, because we have all this data. I think it hit like 34 billion rows. And the question is, what the hell do you use this thing for? How do you get it out in public? And, we have these two things. We have this volume-based data, which is very much like every post ever put about Tottenham Hotspur, if you're a football fan. And then we have like the last 20 tweets in the last 20 minutes on the Game in Live channel through the streaming API, which we launched. And we see there's this interplay between both of them. And we're trying to open this up, test this, work out how to use it. We've had a lot of first round feedback from customers who've played with it and given us a load of features that we're going to be shipping in the next few weeks. The API key infrastructure should go live again this week or next week. So anyone can come, buy some credits, register, pull a load of data and play with it. And we want to get this into the hands of the public, really. So we have quite a few subnets we're working with that either want to use this to fuel predictions. As Steph mentioned, I think this is going live in Squad. We are looking at working with a bunch of sort of early stage commercial partners around this, and the pricing's really attractive. even like, I'm not going to give too much away, but a bunch of other people who are starting to play with this and give us feedback, because there was a really interesting post from another DAI protocol that said people pay $5,000 a month for the Twitter Pro API, which allows you to scrape 1 million rows of data. Now, if you've played with Gravity, you can go scrape 2 million, 5 million, 10 million rows for free right now. We're improving the quality of that, but we think we're going to be able to offer lots more data at a competitive price point. And I think one of the things I find challenging with Bittensor sometimes is people focus on, I'm going to be 1/10, 1% of the price. We kind of want to be bigger and better and cheaper with Gravity. And there's so many products we can power off this, from crypto predictions, we're working in sort of an MVP stage with a firm looking at doing remittances. So they send billions of dollars back from Brazilian software workers working in California. And we're just sort of finding the bounds of this, but a lot more to come on 13, a lot more on collaborations in general over the coming months.
And 13's at, you said 34 billion rows of data. And this is just using X and Reddit. Do you guys plan to expand to other data sources? I know in other podcasts you mentioned YouTube transcriptions and Blue Sky. What does that evolution look like?
Yeah, no, that's the inevitable part of 13's evolution. At a technical level, it's quite trivial, to be honest, Grant. And by that, what I really mean is we define a schema for the YouTube API or something like that, and we can basically include that. The priority for us has been bringing up the product and making sure that we've kind of got the value proposition really crystallized and clear. As Will said, we're not just trying to compete on price here. We want something at feature parity or beyond. A premium product built on Bittensor is much more attractive than a cheap product with a subset of features, to be honest. And with that, what will inevitably come is we can include YouTube support, we can include Tumblr, we can include Blue Sky. We're also looking at things like scraping academic journals, sort of an open science angle. There's even like tickers. The nice thing is it's a very general framework. So where we are today is we're proving out our tech with a subset of data sources, but that will expand substantially in the coming months once we're absolutely certain that everything is sort of the product is there at the sort of the full scope.
Yeah, for this, it's about payment rails, security. We're currently working on a way we can privatize the data. Historically, we've sort of celebrated being the largest open source social media data set in the world. We're going to be the largest social media data set in the world that is, made somewhat private for the benefit of TAO holders, let's put it that way, just because we do recognize that we need to have that element to commercialize that. So that goes very shortly, but there's a lot of engineering challenges to go. As Steph said, it's quite simple to then add on YouTube conscription, Blue Sky, but we want to have things like price-based attribution, so we're only scraping stuff if customers want it and are willing to pay for it, and otherwise as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. And then for expanding, right now, Reddit and X, you guys do like the top 350,000 buckets on hourly like cadences. If you go into scraping research papers, how would the, I guess, incentive design change there, or the structure of it change?
The main consideration there is, of course, social media posts are, to all intents and purposes, an inexhaustible supply because new ones are created every second of every minute. When we look towards using, whether it's Nature papers or some other paywalled source of academic papers, there's an interesting difference, which is there is a finite supply, which from a product point of view is not a problem. I mean, if we just completely saturate and we have every Nature paper ever published that's available to our users, that's actually great for us. The incentive design changes because of the dynamics, but fortunately, we're working on something right now called the Global Job Pool. We've already brought it up successfully on Subnet 25. You can think of this like a bounty program where each data source or data label or user task is directly sent through to the miners, and they can, at this point, there isn't a bidding mechanism, but one can imagine a future state where to reduce duplication and wasted effort in the network, miners can just claim the right to work on a certain task. And in this case, once you've scraped all of the, whether it's the historical price trends for NVIDIA or whether it's Nature papers, When the work is done and there's only a trickle of 1 or 2 coming in per day, the market can just solve that for us. We don't need to worry about opening and closing valves here. The miners know they'll get paid per paper. They know they can't fabricate things. They know they can't duplicate things. The arena is set, so to speak. And at that point, what will tend to happen is the collective attention of the miners will go to whatever is most lucrative for them. And social media just happens to be, once again, it's an unending fountain of new data that they can compete and basically be rewarded for. So data scarcity is actually not that much of a technical challenge. Most of it is outsourced to the miners. They'll just self-organize around where the opportunities are best for them.
That makes sense. And then Constellation is the overarching, I guess, product of the combination of your 5 subnets?
Yeah, I mean, Constellation was very much when we set out to build on Bittensor, we always wanted to build something that was more than one product, one subnet. And I think a few teams are maybe beginning to move towards this idea that you need more than just tokens or just predictions or just this. So a lot of Constellation has been about building up an infrastructure to combine things. Here, we gave you a very small demo of a Constellation-like feature where we're using Subnet One to do stuff on Subnet 13. A lot of the architectural work on the back end that we've been doing has been to make those things really easy to do repeatedly. So as we bring up our training subnets, our research subnet, Mainframe on scientific work, and we can talk about that a little bit more later. But also more broadly, there's a load of great subnets in Bittensor that we kind of want to use in a consumer product. Whether that's deepfake detection from Bitmind or the guys at Score that we mentioned before. We think there's a lot of really good stuff coming, and actually having one place to connect tasks between subnets, to use commodities differently, to actually create things that are more than the sum of their parts was a lot of what we wanted to do. So, the immediate phase has been getting our first 2 subnets up, 1 and 13, proving that they fit together. We have a lot to come on training and Subnet 25 in probably next quarter now. But yeah, there's a lot cooking there, and we'll be talking more about how other subnets can, I guess, sort of materialize themselves into the Constellation, and we can make advantage of those in the coming months.
Shout out. If anyone's a team in Bittensor, they want to be plugged into Constellation, reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you.
And connecting those, is that mainly Subnet One miners doing that, or is that your team creating something?
This would realistically happen. We've looked at miner-to-miner communications. I think that the thing that makes the most sense at this point, we've kind of got certain tiers to this. So Subnet One has a layer of miners, and the validators are kind of the gatekeepers of the network, so to speak. If you want to talk to a miner, you don't talk to the miner, you talk to a validator and tell it which miner you want to talk to, and it's kind of like a middleman. And there's one layer above that as well, which is an important design consideration, which is the load balancer. So when you have a platform or a product built on top of a subnet, you don't just want to use one validator as the entry point, because that validator can drift out of consensus with everyone else in the network. Imagine on Subnet One, if OTF built a coding assistant, like a co-pilot assistant using their bandwidth in Subnet One, which by all means they have a right to, and Talstats decides that they want to have a deep researcher, and Macrocosmos wants to have some agentic layer that works on Subnet 13. The issue with that is the validators are basically measuring the performance of the network on very different tasks. And as a result of that, they can't agree on how good the miners are at these tasks, because presumably the miners have different rankings and different distributions on those different use cases. So as a result of that, the load balancer means that any work that comes into the product level or the platform level is just sort of round robin distributed across all the validators, so that every validator samples every possible kind of query that comes into the network. That's just a sort of a stabilization design. It ensures that things work nicer together. And to your question about cross-subnet communication, it is actually just much more robust to go from, in some respects, to that subnet load balancer. That will ensure that you don't disrupt the nominal operation of that subnet. So if we have an image that's uploaded into our product, Apex, and it has the image is potentially a deepfake, and the user query is, can you help me with this? Then we would send that basically to the load balancer head at the platform level on Bitmind. It's much more efficient, much more scalable than going directly to the miners, because you also have more guarantees that the response from the network, because it has percolated up through the validator, will be checked, its correctness will be verified. and it's a more trusted result than just asking a miner. Because a miner on Subnet 1 asking a miner on Subnet 34, who's scoring that, right? Like that's just two people or two peers on two different networks in Bittensor that have many reasons to come up with creative solutions that are not necessarily what the user wants, let's say. So the validators they're an important glue for the network in both of those subnets to make sure that the responses are high quality.
And also, if it was miner to miner, it would put the, I guess, selection process of them picking the right miner now also on the other miner, which is
absolutely. But yeah, there's a whole bunch of extra context that's available in the target subnets metagraph about which miners you want to choose. And also, probably, if you sent a query to 10 miners in Subnet 1 and then they go and query 10 miners each on Subnet 34, you're going to DDoS another network. So
Yeah.
they're not going to thank you for that.
And Will, you had mentioned Mainframe. Mainframe was your evolution from protein folding, Subnet 25. You're now, I don't know if rebranding is the right word, but evolving to what you call Mainframe. And the protein folding subnet folded over 160,000 proteins. I don't know how significant that number is. I'm not in the world of protein folding. Maybe you guys could speak to that. But yeah, what is Mainframe? What's the change there?
So I think protein folding was originally not an experiment, but like a proof of value on could you do detailed scientific work on Bittensor, and I think we've proved that with aplomb. We've actually been doing a lot of research with potential customers, with drug discovery labs, with people doing broader scientific compute, and we found a couple things. One is Subnet 25 is the fastest molecular dynamics simulator in the world. We were talking to guys the other day who were saying that they needed microsecond performance on basically the steps between folding proteins, and Steffen will tell me I'm wrong here. What we actually found is Subnet 25 is doing nanosecond level performance. So this thing is really, really good at molecular dynamics simulations, which are very relevant for folding proteins and folding proteins and drug discovery. But there's a couple other things. One is we found that branch of science is really useful for a load of things, from material science to other sort of computational use cases. But also more broadly, when we were going down drug discovery, we needed to not just fold proteins, but look at docking and ligand binding and all these other topics. So we kind of realized that folding was too small a name, and we decided we were going to rename it. We went for Mainframe because it was kind of tongue-in-cheek play of old supercomputers, but we're actually quite excited about that. We've been doing a lot more market research about the way to take that subnet, what's really valuable, like what sort of customers would want, these sort of liminal spaces where we can actually really drive value into Tau more broadly. And we'll be coming out with a bit more of the sort of learnings from that over the next couple of months. But to be honest, it's more Steffen's baby than mine, so I don't know if you want to add anything, Steph.
I think you pronounced molecular 3 times in a row.
I've got a lisp today.
Yeah, I mean, look, go to the AlphaFold server, so that's their product right now, and run a job. I genuinely encourage you and your users to do that. There's a disclaimer at the bottom of the page which basically says, if the results look completely wrong to you, run it again. And that is that says a lot right there in that one disclaimer. What's underneath that is AlphaFold is a deep learning model, as many people know. It's a heuristic, right? It's basically a curve fitted through a bunch of points, just like a linear regression, but much, much more complicated. It's very fast, which is one of its great strengths. And for the most part, it's very accurate. However, it's hard to predict when it will not be accurate. Even for the same input, you may get a result that is accurate one time and wildly inaccurate the other time. So there's this notion of the gold standard for accuracy, molecular dynamics simulations, or should I say in drug discovery and protein folding. Deep learning is not the gold standard today. And the main reason for it, just as in the case with LLMs, they're high entropy systems. They're sampling. They're choosing words from some distribution. Sometimes they can hallucinate. They can go a little bit off the rails. Whereas molecular dynamics simulations are considered the gold standard because what they're doing is they're simulating the laws of physics acting on the system again and again and again. And for science, it might not be quite as sexy as saying, but we did deep learning. But the reality is the scientists that have real work to do, and they have to be absolutely sure that the results that they're getting are reproducible and interpretable to know how you got from A to B and the consequences of that before you go to the wet lab and start actually creating these proteins in the flesh. The reality is there is a massive and in fact a growing need for ground truth, gold standard results. So what we built in Subnet One was basically a supercharged molecular dynamics engine. We called it protein folding, but it was always in some sense broader than that. The package that we use is a free and open source package called OpenMM. It's very, very powerful, and it's the thing that we use to basically apply the laws of physics to this complicated system of amino acids and particles and whatever else is in the system. Now, OpenMM can do a lot of things natively. So that means our subnet can do a lot of things without us changing basically a line of code. It's very, very good at protein folding, but as Will mentioned, material science research, next generation batteries, materials for batteries, things like that are actually something that you simulate with a very similar articulation. So Mainframe was our step towards making it clear that the scope of the subnet is not limited to protein folding. That was a specific use case that we wanted to prove was possible within Bittensor. But the solution that we have is a highly scalable molecular dynamics engine. So I think that's a partial answer to part of the question about the reason why we changed the name. Secondly, drug discovery. So this is something that we do external to OpenMM right now, but we do that to really complete the circle. Molecular dynamics simulations are very informative. You insert an initial protein shape or configuration. It can just be a linear chain of all of the amino acids. And then what comes out of it at the end is the shape that complicated mixture of atoms will eventually reach in organic matter. And there's a saying in computational biology, which is form defines function. This means the shape that the protein eventually reaches and stabilizes towards will define how it interacts with your body, whether it's a medicine, whether it's toxic. The shape of it is kind of everything you want to know about it in some respects. However, there remains one more step, which is now that it has taken the shape, we've run our molecular dynamics simulation, we've learned something about it, we now need to examine how does it interact with other stuff? How does it interact with drugs? You know, if you take an aspirin, that decomposes in your stomach acid, it travels through your bloodstream, and it attaches to proteins in your body. That's what gives it its effect. This can also be studied in silico using what's called docking. Docking is the examination of the interaction between two systems. So you can have an enzyme ligand system, you can have a protein target, and actually examining how this might bind to this in different regions tells you a huge amount as well. So the two main things that we've been targeting here is broadening the scope of how we can use molecular dynamics to achieve more within the same subnet design without adding a lot of extra overhead. And secondly, we want to make sure that people that are attracted to using Subnet 25 for drug discovery purposes are not taken to sort of, you know, they're not taken to just before the finishing line and then they have to use another platform to do the docking experiment. We realize that it makes more sense that we actually bring that into Subnet 25 as well and give people this much less cognitive load task of specify a target protein, specify an environment that you want it to be examined within, and specify any candidates that you would like to see how it interacts with. And that allows you to answer much more precise questions about the druggability, about gain of function research, loss of function research, and the general properties of these systems. So that was quite a technical thesis there, but that's our thinking about why we felt that protein folding no longer reflects the value that Subnet 25 creates in Bittensor.
So it's is it possible to use this for like assigning probabilities to like certain side effects similar to like Monte Carlo simulations in financial markets where you just map like random paths of what it might bind to and the effects of that?
Yeah, I think we take the simulation to the point of affinity scores right now. Affinity scores basically tell you how happy two different molecules are to be bound together, and that would allow you to determine the dosage that's needed. So you would need to take a lot more of the drug if the affinity is low. It's more likely to disassociate and break apart again, which means the drug's effectiveness or its lifetime, how long it's metabolized, how it's processed within your body. It allows you to answer those kind of questions at this point, yes.
It's like Tinder analytics for proteins.
Never heard that analysis in my life.
Not bad, is it? Okay,
It's talking consumer products. If you guys made that, I think that'd be
Exactly.
very
You just swipe left or you swipe right. Simple UI. We're keeping things real
you'd probably
simple
want to
here.
get in the message data, see what's effective there.
Yeah,
Hey,
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 yeah.
baby. You like docking?
Oh man, I thought of a joke for that that was not appropriate for the show. Um, yeah, okay. Last time we spoke, you guys were like, "This is the benchmarking era." What era would you say Bittensor is now in, or is it still benchmarking now that we are post detail?
I think like I used to think like an era in BitTensor lasted like a month. I think an era in detail lasts like a week or 8 days. There was like the lolcast era. There was like the sum of prices to four era. I think we're in the from a BitTensor perspective, we're in the like, oh, detail's here to stay and it's not broken and kind of watching it stabilize era, which is kind of everyone's a little bit more cautious. People have had their fingers burnt on a rug subnet or a fake subnet and realize that they're not going to go to the moon this week, but they might next week. I think we're in the conviction era. So what I mean by that is like we're in month 2 of detail. If you go through the Discord, I can really find, Stefan doesn't monitor all 78 Discords, but he has 3 kids and I have less of a life than him, I think. Go look at some of the product projects that used to be really prominent in Era 1, and I'm not going to name any names, but there's teams that are basically like, people are asking, is this subnet dead? Are the devs even working anymore? Is stuff happening? Because detail requires you to have a lot more conviction. And for people allocating their Tau, you have to believe this team is going to be here in a year. You have to believe this team has, got conviction and is going to last the path, because otherwise your money's going to zero. So what that requires is very, very different. I think, when we're looking at allocating our Tau in detail, we look at teams we trust, teams we know, doxed or near doxed founders, people who've delivered on promises, people who haven't undersold, ethics and behaviors, because you're investing in these companies and these people. And I think some teams don't like the pressure that they can't just sort of show up and build some cool check and jump on a few calls and do that. And it is much more like, each Tau holder needs to think of themselves as a mini venture capitalist. Which of these teams are you going to bet on? A couple of them might go to zero, but which are the ones that are your steady states, your girls and guys you bag on, and what do you have conviction in? And I think, I think we're going to see in the next couple months a couple teams leave. A couple teams leave politely and quietly, and a couple teams leave noisily, saying details shit and it's not fair. But that there are some teams that have built up a history of being bad actors, and they're not doing that well in detail, because lo and behold, people don't want to trust their funds with them. And I think that's what I expect to see with detail next, like this sort of period where, like, somebody asked me, am I worried about the prices? I'm really worried about prices, because last summer we had the hack and low prices, and I don't think we lost any muscle, but we lost some fat. I think this month we will lose some fat as a protocol, and we will come out leaner and ready to fight. So that's my current thesis today. And then, whenever the next price surge happens, this is crypto, it goes up and down, we'll see more teams come, some of them brilliant, some of them a bit more opportunistic. But I think that's my expectation for today's era. And we're very focused. We always plan to sort of watch and wait for 3 months. Like, I kind of think of this as like the Premier League, like it's the football season. Like week 1, like maybe Nottingham Forest are on top, but you don't really know what the season's going to play out with till game 10. So we're in that process of just watching, absorbing. We're quite confident with where we are and how things are going and how the protocol's evolving. But there's still a bit of whack-a-mole on errors here and there. But generally, I think we're still all in this watching with bated breath process.
I think maybe to add a little bit to that, my expectations about the era we would land into post detail was certainly one that rewards marketing, of course. You have to be visible, you have to be noisy, you have to promote your subnets and what you're building. Product would inevitably become more of an important part of every subnet's roadmap. And those two things have proven to be true so far. However, I get the distinct feeling that sort of the initial sugar rush of detail is sort of starting to pass. I don't feel like we've fully crystallized into the season yet. I feel like we're kind of in limbo as a community. Like people are trying things out. There's a lot of like watching each other, seeing who does what, because we haven't really established the rules yet, right? There's a lot of faux pas and I don't know, certain social dancers and
Like the minor emission thing where people can burn minor emissions.
there's minor emissions, there's the way, shape and form that alpha should be bought back, but only on Saturdays at 7 p.m. when you're at over 5% emission, the sum of prices is 6. There's all of these new sort of intricate rule books that are in some sense not even being handed out. We're just kind of all learning through the grapevine, either by monitoring Discord or, you know, we talk to a lot of other subnet teams very regularly and share information and ideas about, you know, how to navigate this as builders. And I think that has very much been the collective focus right now, just understanding how to drive this new machine. And, you know, aside from that, of course, ensuring that subnets are still well functioning under the new incentivization mechanisms. I imagine, so we've just passed day 30. I think by day 60, we're going to know much more about what the rules of the game look like. But yeah, my feeling right now is we're very focused on doing what we've always done, which is the research and the product that we believe is important for Bittensor. But I don't get a strong feeling that there's this sort of single axis of pressure or excitement towards what Bittensor needs right now. I think it's still very much the aftermath of, look, the incredible launch of Detail, which was, it deserves 30 days, to be honest. It was massive.
Yeah, you said the 60-day mark is going to be about when alpha weight flips tau weight. So that is probably an important aspect to think about.
Exactly.
Yeah, I spoke to Const yesterday, and in his mind and in mine similarly, I think we have like another 3 or 4 months till we really see this thing start to settle in and move. Like we track a lot of institutional wallets. Like we do a lot of tracking of who's buying in where and on our subnets. There's not a lot of like investing happening now. There's quite a lot of aping. There's a few very key players with lots of tau who are almost acting as market makers. Some of them on one subnet, their own subnet. Some of them in a more distributed fashion. A lot of early believers, but like you are jumping into a storm if you allocate into Detail today, because there's 41% of subnets is being sold every single block. So I think as the liquidity increases, we're already seeing less of the crazy price action. But at day 60, day 70, day 90, day 120, you're going to start seeing a lot more activity, because if we look back to the sort of subnet, wave 1 subnet summer 2 months ago, or 2 weeks ago, this is what I mean, like it's not months, it was weeks, man. Like you were making 30% APY on Root because of that, because it's all being sold back. Like sit on Root. Root was really profitable. Has never been more profitable than that week. In another 2 months, Root's going to be like 6%, 7%, and you're going to see way more people aping into Alpha because it's the place to be. So I think when that allocation rehappens and when it becomes safe and less painful to allocate into subnets, you'll see Detail really come to the fore. And I think teams play... Look, again, I don't see any of the grade A teams dicking around with things like burning emissions or playing weird games to make their subnets work. Like the miners are the lifeblood of Bittensor. We've had conviction in that. We've been very, very hesitant to overreact in any stage. We're trying to be steady. Look, it's an intense ride. Sometimes you wake up and prices have moved 50%. In either direction. And strangely, I feel like more zen than at any time in Bittensor, because it's kind of out of our ability to influence now. We just have to keep doing the job we know we can do and doing our best. Trying to stay clear to the values we believe in, really, Grant.
Yeah. I guess for me, the future is bright. It's very exciting. I sincerely hope the community doesn't become overly preoccupied worrying about day trading, and we remember that we're here to build. It's obviously it's fun. It's an opportunity to make some quick capital. I get it. But I hope that in a month or 2 months from now, that's not the sort of prevalent narrative around BitTensor. Where are the quick gains? Because the whole project is long, right? This stuff takes time. And if we're going to really compete with Frontier Labs, we need to put the time in, and we need to get the people, the smart, capable people as miners, as builders, and to build the products that are going to make BitTensor an enduring project, a flagship in its space, which it has. It's seized that territory quite a while ago as being the preeminent decentralized AI project, and it wasn't because of quick gains in aping. And I just think we can't take our eyes off the ball, because there's new players in town, and they're good. And they're moving fast, and they also don't have real incentives, so they're kind of cheating. But but they build good models, and they build good services, and we need to be mindful of the fact that if we spend 50% of our effort figuring out how to make alpha on some bullshit subnet that just appeared last night, and we're not thinking about building the next generation of AI, then we might look back in a couple of years and wonder, what happened? We were ahead, we were winning this. And so that's what I think about before I fall asleep every night.
And then a big question everybody always has is how to drive value back to the alpha token holders. Everybody, the base level is buybacks, but that seems like almost a lazy way to drive value back. What ideas, I know you guys have talked about like a credit type of system. What ideas do you guys have in the works to drive value back to alpha holders?
Do you want to do it?
Yeah, I wasn't sure.
No.
I think there's a couple aspects. One is again, there was day 4 was the great buyback era. Well, there were 3 days of the great buyback era. And there's a great saying in Silicon Valley that you want to be pre-revenue as long as possible, because a couple subnets came out and were like, we're doing a buyback. It's $3,000. And you're like, maybe that's a little there. So, look, we have 30 odd people. Do your own math on how much it costs to operate Macrocosmos. But the real matter is let's grow these things to insane levels. So when people are like, where's my buyback? Where's my extra cent on my alpha token that has lasted 3 weeks? I'm much more interested in thinking about how do we blow the lid off the value of this thing. We think of ourselves now as a sort of Series A type company. We have a bunch of maturing products, a bunch of research initiatives, and those things, again, it's not even our first birthday yet. That's on Saturday. So if we were any normal VC firm, VC-backed startup, people would be saying, let's put more money in, not can you start paying your revenue back? So we will be looking at how we can return value to alpha tokens through the revenue we gain. We're interviewing a load of salespeople now. Would I rather hire the absolute shark who takes 150 grand or the kind of B-rate person who takes 25 grand? And if we have to pay too much back that we can't operate as a business, these are considerations. So I also look forward to, in the next era, a bit more sensible discourse about how we help build world-beating subnets on Bittensor, not short-term Ponzi schemes. There's one subnet that's gone on about their tokenomics flywheel. They've got 6 fucking tokens. I don't understand which one they are. Their product doesn't fucking work and never has. Pardon my French. We're focused on building and creating something that has lasting value. So that's one piece. I think we are more aggressively looking at how we can give credit bonuses, incentivize people to be holders, use TAL payment rails. I think that's really exciting. And we want people to see the value and use this stuff. We think there's an immense amount of value in data. We think there's an immense amount of value in training Bittensor native models that might be used in a variety of ways across subnets. So we have loads of really clever ideas with tokenomics. To be candid, we're kind of watching still because the system's still stabilizing, and we want to do things that are sustainable and will actually move the needle in the long term, not we'll create a really great Twitter post today. And maybe I'm not hype driven enough, and some of those energies, Grant, but I have conviction that what we're doing has immense long-term value. And when we've spoken, we've debated the sort of do you raise capital and other things. We've had validation of that from investors. So we're confident in our plan, and we're confident there's a lot of good reasons to buy alpha. But I think people need to make sure they do think of that long-term growth trajectory, not just how do I create a reason to buy things today. And, you know, for us, if our alpha tokens get too low, we just sweep them up on a good deal, to be honest.
And then one last question before we end today. Well, this is the last question. What advice do you guys have for not being caught up in the short term and having that long-term vision and mindset in something as fast-paced as Bittensor?
Testnet is not mainnet. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. But in all seriousness, I think that we've had a fair number of teams come to us with pretty polished decks, looking for some sort of, some sort of investment or some support. And I think that a lot of the time their lofty ideas about how their subnet's going to work are radically challenged when they get on mainnet. So for teams, like, I'd say for new teams, Bittensor is the epitome of the scrappy startup energy. You have to just get out there and talk to your community, harness the miners, harness the community, get them to work with you. They're holders. Get on mainnet, work with them, have an honest dialogue, show them the roadmap, be open to debate, and iterate quickly. Because there's nothing you can build on testnet that will survive a mainnet without major revisions. So I think it's really just embracing that chaos energy, and it's fun. Like it's a source of energy. It's obviously exhausting as well, but it's a real thrill. But that if we could start again, I think that for us, just really coming in ready to iterate as quickly as we need to do these things, and also be prepared to challenge our ideas. You know, be really candid with feedback. It will just make you move so much faster. And I guess one other thought for me as well is, it's really important to have a monetization strategy for your subnet, to be honest, longer term. I think gone are the days when a compelling proof of concept was sufficient to get support. Now, the game's changed. Bittensor has matured. It's a good thing, that the level is higher than ever. And I'm seeing really professional teams that show up and they're basically shipping product on day zero. Really, really cool. Hats off to those guys. I know how much work that is. So, yeah, I guess that's my thoughts. Anything from you?
I think I'd echo the point about building in the open. Like I'll pull out one team I have a massive amount of respect for, like Distributed Tensor and Templar. Like they've been live since like October. They were ransacked with bugs. They had every error under the sun. Sam has kept building and building and building and has an amazing community on 3. It's very similar to what we had on 25 with Brian and Simon and our guys. But like, your miners are your community. Don't stiff them on weird emission cutbacks, stuff like this. Like, I'm in DMs with so many of our big miners about what we're doing. They're our holders now. Like, your miners are your holders. If your miners don't have conviction in what you're doing, you're screwed. So that's really important. The second element, it's a piece of advice given by me very early in our thing, is DCA every day. So if you're trying to build funds, pay salaries, cover compute costs, don't try game the market, understand subnet sentiment, understand crypto pricing. If that's your business, great. But just
if that's your business, use Data Universe.
Use Data Universe. But like, just find ways to let you focus on building and not get too caught up in staring at the price and worrying about that. For us in our first year, it meant we just sold a little bit every day of the inflationary rewards to keep us going. And it means that, when times are good, you don't get too excited, and when times are bad, you don't get too upset. And it means you'll be here for the long haul. So, for me, I just hope as many teams are here for the long haul on Bittensor as possible.
Steffen, Will, always a pleasure chatting with you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham.
Thanks, buddy.